It was a crisp autumn morning when I first realized how far I had come. As I sipped my coffee, the city skyline stretched out before me, a testament to years of hard work and relentless ambition. Being the director of one of the largest construction companies in New Jersey had its rewards: financial security, respect, and the satisfaction of seeing my vision take shape in concrete and steel. But it was more than just a career. It was a legacy, something I had built from the ground up. My office was perched on the top floor of a high-rise, a symbol of the success I had always strived for. From here, I could oversee everything, from the smallest residential projects to the most ambitious commercial developments. It was my domain, a place where I called the shots, made the deals, and saw dreams turn into reality. Yet as fulfilling as my work was, it was nothing compared to the joy I had found in my personal life. Mary and I had been married for a little over a year. We met during a charity event, one of those upscale affairs where everyone is more interested in being seen than in the cause they're supposedly supporting. She was different, though. Amidst the chatter and clinking glasses, she stood out, graceful, intelligent, with a quiet confidence that drew me in. We connected immediately, and our relationship moved quickly, much to the surprise of our friends. But when you know, you know. Our life together was almost too good to be true. We lived in a beautiful house just outside the city, surrounded by trees and the tranquility of the suburbs. It was our sanctuary, a place where we could escape from the pressures of our busy lives. The house was filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and plans for the future. We hadn't yet started a family, but we talked about it often. Mary wanted children, and so did I, eventually. For now, we were content with just the two of us, enjoying the honeymoon phase that everyone warned would fade, but hadn't yet shown any signs of doing so. Mary was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: supportive, understanding, and incredibly loving. She had her own career as an interior designer, and she was just as successful in her field as I was in mine. We understood each other's drive, the late nights at the office, the stress that came with being at the top. And yet, we always made time for each other. Weekends were sacred, reserved for lazy mornings in bed, spontaneous road trips, or just curling up on the couch with a good movie. It was the kind of life I had always dreamed of: simple, happy, and filled with love. But life, as I had learned, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Looking back, I should have known that nothing stays perfect forever. I was too caught up in the bliss of our new life together to notice the small signs, the things that didn't quite add up, the moments that seemed off. Perhaps I didn't want to see them, didn't want to believe that anything could go wrong in our perfect world. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and it wasn't long before the cracks in our seemingly perfect life began to show. It started as a subtle sensation, a faint itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't quite scratch. At first I dismissed it as paranoia. After all, with the pressures of work and the responsibilities that came with my position, it wasn't unusual for stress to manifest in strange ways. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger, gnawing at me with every passing day. The first time I noticed something was off, I was driving home late one evening. The city streets were quiet, the usual rush-hour chaos long gone, leaving just the hum of my tires on the pavement. As I navigated through the familiar route, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A car, a dark sedan, its headlights dimmed, seemed to be following me. At first I thought it was just coincidence, maybe someone else heading in the same direction. But as I turned onto side streets and took unexpected routes, the sedan stayed with me, matching my every move. My heart began to race, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But the longer the car followed, the harder it became to convince myself. Finally, just as I was about to make a sharp turn toward the highway, the car veered off down another street. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, but the unease lingered, settling deep in my bones. The next few days passed without incident, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. I started paying more attention to my surroundings, noticing things I would have otherwise ignored. It wasn't long before I began seeing unfamiliar cars parked near my house. Vehicles that didn't belong to my neighbors, their occupants always out of sight. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself they were probably just visitors, contractors, or delivery drivers. But the cars were always there, no matter the time of day or night. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone. One evening, I stood at my living room window, staring out at the street. The glow from the streetlights cast long shadows, making it hard to tell what was real and what was my imagination. But there it was again, a car I didn't recognize, parked just a few houses down. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever was in that car was there because of me. I mentioned it to Mary, but she just laughed it off, telling me I was working too hard and needed to relax. Maybe she was right, but the unease wouldn't go away. The final straw came during a business meeting at one of my usual restaurants. It was a quiet place, the kind where you could discuss deals without worrying about prying ears. As I sat across from my client, going over plans and figures, I felt it again, that nagging sensation that I was being watched. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I saw him. At a table in the far corner, a man sat alone, his eyes fixed on me. He was nondescript, dressed in a way that allowed him to blend in, but there was something about him that set off alarm bells in my mind. His gaze was intense, unblinking, as if he were studying me. I tried to focus on the meeting, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that man. Who was he? What did he want? The questions swirled in my mind, making it hard to concentrate. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to the cars, to the strange sense of being followed. As the meeting wrapped up, I glanced back at the corner table, but the man was gone, leaving behind an empty chair and a half-finished drink. As I drove home that night, the streets felt darker, more foreboding. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every headlight in my mirror made my pulse quicken. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was on edge, my nerves frayed from the constant sense of being watched. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that there was no real danger, but deep down I knew something was wrong, and that knowledge gnawed at me, refusing to be ignored. The feeling of unease had become a constant companion, lurking in the back of my mind and making even the most mundane tasks feel like a burden. Every time I left the house, I found myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the streets for anything out of the ordinary. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the house, convinced that someone was out there, watching. It was wearing me down, and I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. One evening, after another restless day at work, I decided to talk to Mary. We were sitting in the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. She was curled up on the couch with a book, her expression peaceful and content. For a moment I hesitated, not wanting to disrupt the calm, but the weight of my thoughts was too much to bear. "Mary," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk for a minute?" She looked up from her book, concern immediately clouding her eyes. "Of course, John. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I know this might sound strange, but I think someone's following me. I've noticed cars parked near the house that don't belong there, and there's this feeling I can't shake, like I'm being watched." Mary's brow furrowed as she listened, her eyes searching my face for answers. "John, are you sure? It could just be your imagination, or maybe it's just neighbors or visitors you haven't seen before." "I thought the same at first," I admitted, "but it's been happening too often to be a coincidence. And there was this man at the restaurant during my last meeting. He was just sitting there, staring at me. It felt wrong." Mary set her book aside and moved closer, taking my hands in hers. "John, you've been under a lot of stress lately. The company, all those projects, it's a lot to handle. Maybe it's just your mind playing tricks on you because you're tired." "I've thought about that too," I said, squeezing her hands for comfort. "But this feels different. It's not just in my head. I can't explain it, but I know something's not right." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening. I believe you, John. If you feel this strongly about it, then it's real to you, and that's what matters. But maybe, just maybe, it is the stress talking. You've been pushing yourself so hard, working late nights, barely taking a break. It's no wonder you're feeling on edge. I let out a long sigh, the tension in my chest easing just a bit. Mary always had a way of grounding me, of making the world seem less chaotic. Maybe you're right, I conceded. But what if I'm not just imagining things? What if there's really someone out there? Mary smiled gently, brushing a hand through my hair. Then we'll deal with it together. But first, you need to take care of yourself. We both do. Remember, our trip to Paris is just around the corner. A chance to get away from all of this, to relax and recharge. We've been looking forward to it for so long. It's exactly what we need right now. The mention of Paris brought a small smile to my face. It was true. We had been planning this vacation for months, a much-needed escape from the demands of our busy lives. The idea of strolling along the Seine, sipping coffee at a quiet cafe, and losing ourselves in the art and history of the city was something I had been dreaming of. Maybe Mary was right. Maybe all I needed was a break, a chance to step back and breathe. You're right, I said finally, the tension easing from my shoulders. Paris sounds like exactly what we need. Maybe I am just overthinking things. Mary leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. We'll go to Paris and everything will feel better, you'll see. No more work, no more stress. Just us, enjoying the city of love. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe everything would be okay. I wrapped my arms around Mary, holding her close as the fire crackled softly in the background. The warmth of her embrace, the promise of our upcoming trip, it was enough to make me believe, if only for a moment, that the shadows in my mind were just that. Shadows, nothing more. But as I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the comforting thoughts of Paris, a small voice in the back of my mind refused to be silenced. What if the danger was real? What if, no matter how far we traveled, it followed us? I pushed the thought aside, determined to focus on the positive. After all, I had Mary by my side, and together, we could face anything. The trip to Paris had been everything Mary promised it would be: beautiful, relaxing, and a much-needed escape. We spent our days wandering through art galleries, sipping wine at charming cafes, and losing ourselves in the romance of the city. For a while, I managed to push aside the nagging fears that had been haunting me, letting the magic of Paris work its charm. But as our return flight touched down, reality began to creep back in. It was late when we arrived home, the house dark and quiet as we stepped inside, dragging our luggage behind us. There was a familiar comfort in being back, but something felt off, a subtle tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. Mary headed upstairs to unpack, but I lingered in the hallway, feeling an uneasy prickling sensation at the back of my neck. As I walked through the house, I noticed little things that seemed out of place. A picture frame on the mantel was slightly askew, a chair in the dining room was pushed back as if someone had been sitting there, and the front door, had I closed it? It was only slightly ajar, but enough to set my nerves on edge. I pushed the door shut, the soft click of the latch echoing in the silence. My steps grew more cautious as I made my way to my office. It was my sanctuary, a space where I could retreat from the world, surrounded by books and the tools of my trade. As I opened the door, a sense of dread washed over me. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway, casting long shadows across the floor. Then I saw it. The drawer in my desk was slightly open, a jagged crack running along the wood where it had been forced. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, each step heavy with fear. The drawer had been locked, a place where I kept personal documents, things that weren't meant for anyone else's eyes. Now the lock was broken, and the contents were in disarray. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the mess, my mind racing. Someone had been in my house. Someone had rifled through my things, invading the privacy of my home, my sanctuary. The fear I had managed to bury in Paris came rushing back stronger than ever. This was no longer just a feeling or a suspicion. This was real. John? Mary's voice came from the hallway, pulling me from my thoughts. She appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she saw my face. What's wrong? I pointed to the broken drawer, unable to find the words to explain the turmoil in my mind. Someone's been here, I finally managed to say, my voice trembling with anger and fear. While we were away, someone broke in. Mary's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Oh my God, John, what do we do? I didn't hesitate. We're calling the police. Mary nodded, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. While she dialed, I continued to survey the room, trying to determine what might be missing. The drawer had been the target, that much was clear. But what had they been looking for? Had they found it? The police arrived quickly, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of the violation we had just experienced. They moved through the house methodically, asking questions, taking notes, and dusting for fingerprints. I gave them as much information as I could, recounting the strange occurrences before our trip, the cars, the feeling of being watched. One of the officers, a tall man with a serious expression, led me back to my office. It looks like they were after something specific, he said, examining the broken drawer. Is there anything in particular that might have been valuable or important? I hesitated, my mind racing. There were documents, contracts, personal papers, but nothing that should have attracted this kind of attention. I'm not sure, I admitted. There are some personal files, but I need to go through them to see if anything's missing. The officer nodded. Take your time. We'll do our best to find out who did this, but in the meantime, it's important that you and your wife stay vigilant. If anything else seems off, don't hesitate to call us. As the police finished their inspection and left, I sat at my desk, staring at the broken drawer. The fear that had been gnawing at me for weeks was now fully justified. Someone was targeting me, us, and the uncertainty of what they wanted or what they might do next was almost unbearable. Mary came to stand beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. We'll get through this, John, she said softly, but I could hear the fear in her voice, the uncertainty that mirrored my own. I nodded, trying to muster some semblance of confidence. But deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning, that whoever had been in our house wasn't finished. The question that haunted me now was what they would do next, and whether we would be ready when they did. The days following our return were tense. The police had promised to investigate, but there was no immediate resolution, leaving us in a state of uncertainty. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that whoever had broken into our home was still out there, waiting. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in on us with each passing day. One evening, after another restless day at work, I came home to find the house eerily quiet. Mary was in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared dinner. The silence between us had grown, a palpable distance that neither of us seemed able to bridge. I knew she was scared, but there was something more, something she wasn't telling me. I made my way to my office, hoping to lose myself in work, to find some sense of normalcy in the routine. As I sat down at my desk, my eyes were drawn to a piece of paper lying in the middle of the desk. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't there before. Slowly I reached for the note, my hands trembling as I unfolded it. The words, scrawled in a messy hand, sent a chill down my spine. Mary will be mine, even if I have to kill you. The room seemed to spin, my breath catching in my throat. I stood up abruptly, the chair clattering to the floor as I rushed out of the office. Mary! I called out, my voice shaky with fear and anger. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale as she saw the note in my hand. What is it, John? What happened? I held the note out to her, unable to find the words. Her eyes scanned the paper, and I saw the blood drain from her face as she read the message. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Who is this from, Mary? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Who would write something like this? She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. John, I didn't want you to find out like this. Find out what? I asked, my patience wearing thin. What aren't you telling me? Mary took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she reached out to steady herself against the wall. "It's Winston," she finally said, her voice trembling. He's the one who wrote this." "Winston? Who the hell is Winston?" I asked, the name unfamiliar to me. She looked away, shame and regret etched on her face. "Winston was my high school boyfriend. We were together for years. He was my first love, my everything, back then." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You've never mentioned him before," I said, trying to process this new information. "Why would he be doing this now?" Mary hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. "There's more, John. After high school, Winston got into some trouble. He was arrested for robbery and he ended up in prison. I stayed in touch with him, even visited him a few times." The room seemed to close in around me as she continued. "We lost touch after he was released, but a few months ago he found me again. We started seeing each other. I was lonely. You were always working, and it just happened. I felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under me." "You had an affair," I said, my voice hollow. It wasn't a question, but a statement, one that I could barely bring myself to say. Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, John. I never meant for it to go this far. I ended it, but Winston, he didn't take it well. He started showing up at the house, following me. He became obsessed." The reality of the situation began to sink in. The strange cars, the feeling of being watched. It was all Winston. "He's been stalking us," I said, the anger rising in my chest. "And now he's threatening to kill me?" Mary broke down, her sobs echoing in the room. "I never wanted this, John. I thought I could handle it, that he would just go away. But he's not the same person I knew. He's dangerous." I felt a cold fury settle over me. The betrayal, the fear, the uncertainty, it all crystallized into a single unyielding resolve. "We're going to the police," I said, my voice firm. "They need to know everything." Mary nodded, her face a mask of misery. "I'll tell them everything," she whispered. "I just want this to be over." The drive to the police station was tense, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Mary's confession had shattered the fragile trust we had built, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. As we arrived, the police took her statement, and I watched as she recounted the details of her affair, her voice shaking with every word. Winston had been her high school sweetheart, the boy who had stolen her heart when they were both young and reckless. They had been inseparable, planning a future together until his arrest had torn them apart. Even after he was sentenced, Mary had stood by him, visiting him in prison, writing him letters, holding on to the hope that he would change. But prison had hardened Winston, turning him into someone Mary no longer recognized. When he was released, he had found her, rekindling their old flame with promises of a better future. But it wasn't long before his darker side began to show. He became possessive, controlling, unable to let go of the past. When Mary tried to break it off, he refused to accept it, spiraling into a dangerous obsession. The police listened carefully, taking notes, their expressions grim. They promised to do everything they could to protect us, but the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Winston was out there, and he was determined to have Mary no matter the cost. As we left the station, I felt a heavy weight settle over me. The woman I thought I knew had been hiding a secret that now threatened to destroy us both. The trust between us had been broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. All I knew was that Winston was still out there, and the danger was far from over. Back at home, the silence was deafening. Mary tried to speak, but I couldn't bring myself to listen. The betrayal was too fresh, the pain too deep. I needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. As I lay in bed that night staring up at the ceiling, the words from Winston's note echoed in my mind. "Mary will be mine, even if I have to kill you." I knew then that this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about survival, and I wasn't going to let Winston win. The day Winston was arrested should have brought a sense of relief, but instead, it felt like the beginning of a new nightmare. The police called early in the morning to inform us that they had taken him into custody. He had been found lurking near our neighborhood, a knife in his possession. The thought of how close he had come, How easily things could have gone differently sent a shiver down my spine. Mary was in the kitchen when I received the call. As I hung up the phone, I stood there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. Winston was no longer a threat, at least not physically, but the damage he had caused, what we had caused, was irreparable. "Winston's been arrested," I said, walking into the kitchen. Mary looked up from her cup of coffee, her face pale and drawn. She nodded, but there was no relief in her expression, no sign that the weight of her actions had lifted. If anything, she seemed more burdened, as if the finality of Winston's arrest had only deepened the guilt she carried. "We should be glad it's over," I continued, my voice flat. "But I can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning of a different kind of hell." Mary's eyes met mine, filled with the same sorrow and regret I had seen since her confession. "John, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." "Didn't you?" I snapped, the anger I had been suppressing finally breaking through. "You say you didn't want to hurt me, but what did you think would happen, Mary? You were having an affair with a maniac, and you kept it a secret, knowing full well what he was capable of." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. The floodgates had opened, and the torrent of emotions I had been holding back came rushing out. "You put my life in danger, Mary. You brought a psychopath into our lives, and for what? Because you were lonely? Because I was working too much?" I shook my head, disbelief and betrayal warring within me. "How could you do this to us? How could you do this to me?" Mary flinched at my words, her tears now streaming down her face. "I know I made a mistake, John," she cried. "I know I hurt you, but I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could handle it, that I could make it right without you ever knowing. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I echoed bitterly. "Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Mary. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our marriage, our life together. And you put me in danger. Do you have any idea what it's like to wake up every day wondering if you're being watched? If today's the day someone's going to try and kill you?" She sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. "I was scared, John. I didn't know what to do. When Winston started getting dangerous, I tried to end it, but he wouldn't let go. I thought I could protect you by keeping it a secret, by handling it on my own. I never imagined it would come to this." I stared at her, my heart aching with a mix of anger and sadness. "That's the problem, Mary. You thought you could handle it on your own. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You made decisions that affected both of us without ever considering how I would feel, how I would be hurt." Her sobs quieted, but the tears still flowed. "I know," she whispered, her voice broken. "I know I've lost your trust, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to earn it back. But I love you, John. I love you more than anything, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, to fix us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could find a way to repair the damage that had been done. But the wound was too fresh, the pain too raw. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "I don't know if that's possible, Mary," I said, my voice hollow. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done." She reached out, but I pulled back, the distance between us growing with each passing second. "John, please," she begged. "Don't give up on us. Don't let this be the end." I shook my head, my heart heavy with the weight of what we had lost. "I need time, Mary. I need time to figure out if I can ever trust you again, if I can ever look at you and not see the person who put my life in danger." She nodded, her face crumpling with despair. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "I'll wait, John. I'll wait for as long as it takes." I left the kitchen, the silence between us more suffocating than ever. As I walked through the house, the memories of our life together seemed to taunt me, reminders of the love we once shared, now overshadowed by betrayal and fear. I spent the rest of the day alone, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. Winston's arrest should have been a victory, but it felt hollow. The real damage had been done long before the police put him in handcuffs, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be undone. That night, I slept in the guest room, the physical distance between us mirroring the emotional chasm that had opened up. Mary didn't protest, didn't try to convince me to stay. She knew, just as I did, that things would never be the same. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that the question wasn't whether I could forgive Mary. It was whether I could ever feel safe with her again. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. And in our case, it wasn't just trust that had been shattered, but the very foundation of our marriage. The only thing I knew for certain was that our lives would never return to what they once were. Winston was gone, but the scars he left behind would remain. And as much as I wanted to believe that Mary and I could overcome this, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end. The days following Winston's arrest were a blur. The house that had once been our sanctuary felt more like a prison, each room a reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. I spent most of my time at the office, throwing myself into work as a way to escape the reality that awaited me at home. But no matter how much I tried to distance myself, the truth was unavoidable. My marriage was over. I had made my decision. There was no going back. The trust was gone, the love tainted by lies and deceit. I couldn't live with the constant reminder of what Mary had done, the danger she had brought into our lives. It was time to move on, to reclaim some semblance of peace and safety in my life. One evening I returned home with a heavy heart, knowing that the time had come to end things once and for all. Mary was in the living room, staring out the window as if waiting for something, perhaps a miracle that would never come. "Mary, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but emotionless. She turned to face me, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. "John, please," she began, her voice pleading. "Please don't do this. We can work through this. I know we can." I shook my head, the resolve in my heart unyielding. "There's nothing left to work through, Mary. This marriage is over. I can't trust you. And without trust, there's nothing left." Tears streamed down her face as she took a step toward me. "I know I've made mistakes. But I love you, John. I'll do anything to make this right. Please don't leave me." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, and felt nothing but a cold emptiness. "You say you love me, but how can I believe that after everything that's happened? You betrayed me, Mary. You put my life in danger. I can't forgive that." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. "I was scared, John. I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe if I could just keep things together, we could get past this. But I was wrong." I watched her, my heart hardening with every word. "You were wrong, Mary. You've been wrong about a lot of things. But I'm done paying the price for your mistakes." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "John, please. I know I've hurt you, but we can start over. We can rebuild what we had." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "What we had, Mary, what did we really have? You were lying to me for months. And now, I can't help but wonder, did you ever really love me?" Her silence was deafening, and I knew the answer before she even spoke. I cared about you, John," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Cared?" I repeated, the word like a knife in my chest. "That's not the same as love, Mary." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I wanted to love you, I tried to, but it was never really about love, John." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. "Then what was it about?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. "The security, the life you could give me. I've always been drawn to that, to the stability, the comfort. I thought it would be enough. But I never really loved you the way you deserve to be loved." I stared at her, the truth cutting deeper than I had imagined. "So that's it," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You were with me for my money." She didn't deny it, and that was answer enough. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and with it came a strange sense of clarity. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my tone firm and resolute. "There's nothing left to discuss." Mary sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "Please, John. I know I've been selfish, but I can change. I'll do anything to make it right." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The woman before me was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized, someone I no longer wanted in my life. "It's too late, Mary," I said quietly. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." I turned to leave, the weight of my decision lifting slightly as I walked away. There was no doubt in my mind that this was the right choice. The life we had shared was built on lies, and there was no going back. As I left the house that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was free. Free from the deception, free from the danger, free to rebuild my life on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that somewhere down the line, I would find happiness again. As the days turned into weeks, the full weight of what had happened began to settle in. At first, it was a distant thought, something I could push away, keep at arm's length. But as time went on, the reality of it all became impossible to ignore. I had come so close to losing everything, my life, my future, all because of a man I didn't even know. And worse, because of the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, the silence of the empty house pressing in on me, I would replay everything in my mind, over and over. The fear I felt when I found the note, the cold dread that had gripped me when Mary confessed to the affair, and the sickening realization that Winston had been just a breath away from killing me. It all came rushing back in waves, leaving me gasping for air in the darkness. How had it come to this? How had I let my life spiral so far out of control that I hadn't even seen the danger lurking right in front of me? It was a question I asked myself repeatedly, but no answer ever came. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had been living a lie, and that lie had nearly cost me everything. I tried to bury myself in work, to find some sense of normalcy in the routine that had once defined my life. But even there, the shadows of what had happened followed me. Every time I walked into my office, I would see that broken drawer, a constant reminder of the night I realized just how vulnerable I was. The documents that had been rifled through, the papers scattered across my desk, they were all insignificant now, just like everything else I'd once thought mattered. Winston was in jail, but that did nothing to ease the gnawing fear that had taken root in my mind. What if he had succeeded? What if he had killed me? All because of a woman who had never truly loved me. It was a thought that haunted me, day and night. The idea that I could have died for someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end was almost too much to bear. And then there was the betrayal, the cold, bitter truth that the woman I had given my heart to had never truly cared for me. Mary's confession still echoed in my mind, her words like poison seeping into every corner of my consciousness. "I never really loved you, John." It was a simple statement, but one that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let myself believe in something that was never real? The love I thought we shared, the future I thought we were building. It was all a facade, a carefully constructed lie that had come crashing down around me. And now, in the aftermath, I was left with nothing but the rubble of a life that no longer made sense. The anger was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. Anger at Mary for her betrayal, at Winston for his madness, but most of all, at myself. I had been a fool, blinded by love and trust, unable to see the truth even when it was right in front of me. I had built my life around a lie, and now that lie had been exposed, leaving me with nothing but questions and regrets. But even in my darkest moments, there was a small part of me that refused to give in to despair. I had survived. Despite everything, I was still here, still breathing, still alive. Winston hadn't won. He hadn't taken my life, and he hadn't taken my future. That small, stubborn part of me clung to that fact, refusing to let go, even when the rest of me wanted to sink into the abyss. And yet the road ahead felt impossibly long. How was I supposed to move on from this? How was I supposed to rebuild my life when everything I thought I knew had been stripped away? The house felt empty, devoid of the warmth and love that had once filled it. Every room, every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall was a reminder of the life I had lost. the life that had never truly existed. There were moments when the grief threatened to overwhelm me, when the sheer weight of everything that had happened felt like too much to bear. I would find myself standing in the middle of a room, staring at nothing, the memories crashing over me like waves. The laughter we had shared, the plans we had made, they were all tainted now, stained by the knowledge that none of it had been real. But in those moments, I forced myself to keep moving. One step at a time, one day at a time, I would find a way to move forward. The life I had known was gone, but that didn't mean I was finished. There was still a future out there, somewhere beyond the pain and the betrayal, and I was determined to find it. It wasn't easy. Every day was a struggle, every memory a reminder of what I had lost. But slowly, bit by bit, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, into projects that demanded my full attention, leaving no room for the thoughts that threatened to drag me down. I started to reconnect with old friends, people I had drifted away from over the years as I had poured everything into my marriage. And I sought out help, talking to a therapist who helped me begin to untangle the mess of emotions that had been left in the wake of Winston and Mary. The road to healing was long, and I knew it would be a while before I truly felt whole again. But I was on that road, moving forward, one step at a time. The life I had known was gone, but I was still here, still standing. And that, I realized, was a victory in itself. As the days turned into months, the pain began to dull, the memories fading into the background. I would never forget what had happened, but I refused to let it define me. I had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild, to find a new path, one that wasn't built on lies and deceit. And so I moved forward, leaving behind the wreckage of my old life, determined to build something new, something real. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when the pain would resurface, when the anger and the grief would threaten to pull me back into the darkness. But I would keep going, one step at a time, until I found the life I deserved, the life that was truly mine.